So hi everyone, good afternoon, and a really warm welcome back to the South Wales Tableau user group. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just to give you a little bit of a background about us, this is actually our second tug, and we're really excited to be back. We're based in Cardiff, and we launched our group last summer, and so we're continuing to bring you some fantastic speakers from across the Tableau community. You can find us on the link under the Tableau user groups. Just want to do a quick mention that if you are based in South Wales, we'd love to hear from you to see if you're interested in joining us to help out running the user group. It'd be really great to, so please reach out, because it'd be really great to collaborate with you and to have some more representation from other businesses locally. So I'm Gemma O'Neill, and I'm going to be hosting this session. So I'm one of the organisers of the group, along with Rachel and Georgia. I'm also a BI analyst here at confused.com. I've been here for just over a year now, and a really cool part of my role, and quite an interesting part, is that I get to organise lots of our other internal Tableau activities. So things like our frequent Tableau Doctor Data sessions that we run as a weekly drop-in for our analytics teams. I also get involved in organising our data viz team days, so where we get to compete in small teams. We do challenges, and we also have some prizes, so lots of fun things, trying to keep the engagement with Tableau going internally. So also we've got something very exciting. We've just launched our own internal data literacy programme. So this is running courses around things like data storytelling, visualization training, data literacy introductions, some bite-sized courses, things like that. So lots of things happening. So yeah, so that's a bit about me. Just want to mention that I'm also joined today by Maria. Maria's from our data science team. She's just going to be helping out on the tech side, so just looking out for if there's any questions coming in. So Maria, did you want to say hi?
Hello.
Hello. Thank you. Okay, so so just to give you a bit of information about the meeting. So this is via a live Zoom webinar, which means that everybody will be muted by default, but we do have a chat section at the bottom. There's also a Q&A area. So if you do have any questions for any of the speakers or for myself, please just put them in the chat, in the Q&A section, and we can either get to those after each talk or at the end. We'll have a few minutes to go over any questions if there are any. If you frequent any other Tableau user groups that are done virtually, you'll probably know that these get recorded, and then afterwards they get uploaded to the Tableau YouTube channel for you to watch on playback. Okay, so just going through our agenda. So as I said, we've got some brilliant speakers lined up for you today from across the Tableau community. I really want to say a big thank you to them for giving up their time today, especially it being a Friday afternoon. So I did think that one through. So first up, we're going to be joined by Jim de Clercq. Jim is a Tableau lead at VolkerWessels and co-leader of the Netherlands Tableau user group, and he'll be presenting how we created a dashboard template at VolkerWessels. So sharing his knowledge about design considerations, technical tips and tricks on how to implement a standardized workbook template. Next up, we're really pleased to be joined also by Robbin Vernooij. Robbin is a data coach at the Information Lab in the UK, and he'll be presenting Let Us Become Comfortable with the New Data Model. So taking us back over Tableau's new data model, getting to know the ins and outs so we can build more efficient workbooks. And finally, on the similar subject, we have Liam George. Liam is a BI analyst, also here at confused.com, working in product analytics. He's also a subject matter expert for relationship models in Tableau. And he's going to be talking us through Tableau relationship sources for analysts. So covering an analyst perspective on how Tableau replaces a single flat data set with relationship sources and how it's managed through contextual joins and smart aggregation. So that's going to include a live demo and a really fun data set. So, okay, so let's get started. Jim, would you like to share your screen and say hi?
Certainly. Let me get started. So yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here. Yeah, like Gemma just said, I'll be talking about the design standards that we build at VolkerWessels. Let me just get this set up. Right. Okay, so before I get started though, let me do a bit more of introduction. It was already said, I'm the Tableau lead at VolkerWessels, a construction company in the Netherlands, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide, and as well as a Tableau leader for the Tableau user group in the Netherlands. I've also been involved in the Tableau Ambassador program for the last 3 years, also for user groups, helping people in the user group program to improve their user groups and be more involved in getting those set up. Yeah, and then when I'm not playing with data, I like to play some board games. I like to climb boulders in my local gym. Yeah, so more around VolkerWessels. So the data team at VolkerWessels, yeah, it's a like I said, construction and development organization, but our data team is part of our central IT organization. So the IT organization supports over 30 smaller construction companies in the Netherlands, and we all support them with their technology needs, which include data and dashboards. So the data team was created about 3 years ago as part of a strategic effort to make the whole company a little bit more data-driven. This team then offers services from building data pipelines and integrating applications to building dashboards and exposing data in that way. We have about 7 Tableau developers as part of a larger team that also contains people managing our data warehouse. We maintain around 70 dashboards nowadays for about 400, 500 users. I think we just crossed that threshold as well. And like I said, all our dashboards are in Tableau. We're using other tools for extracting and transforming our data. But the main thing is we're supporting these 30 different companies with standardized dashboards. So we have one dashboard, we have row level security to make sure it's can be the same but different for everyone. But it also makes it more important for us to make a very consistent look and feel for our dashboards. And the concept of style guides and dashboard standards as such has been pretty appealing to us. So the first time I saw a fully fleshed out style guide was this style guide from the BBC Audiences team. It's a very detailed document that they released in 2018. It's actually located on Tableau Public. You can have a look yourself. And it contains a lot of tips and tricks on how to, or at least not tips and tricks, it's more around guidelines, how to format specific graphs and graph types. The focus is really on the individual graphs as they're using these graphs in their stories that they're publishing, and they're not publishing as many dashboards. So the dashboard design is not featured as heavily. In the same year, JLL, a real estate development company, also released their style guide, also on Tableau Public. There's a lot of Tableau superstars working at JLL, so it was very clear that they've been presenting this a lot in the community. And this also shows how to use the graphics, but it also has a lot more elements on how to lay out dashboards, how to indicate that there's dashboard actions and all those kind of things. So these two were a pretty big inspiration. But before we go to what we did with this, I also want to kind of step back a little and explain a little bit why I feel you need a design standard and why it can help. There's 3 main parts shown here. First of all, there's your consumers, your dashboard consumers. For us, like a dashboard is very clear, or at least we're very quick to notice kind of how it probably works. But you have to imagine that your dashboard consumers, they don't work with dashboards all the time. And for them, every dashboard is kind of a new experience. And by having this kind of standard look and feel, standard layout, you make it simpler for them to go to a new dashboard and immediately feel a little bit more confident that they know how to use it. If the filters are in the same places, if the information can be found in similar places, the color usage is consistent, it makes it a lot simpler for them to get started. Secondly, for your dashboard developers, this also helps them to well, by having this standard, you kind of embed the best practices around design and make it simple for them to use those best practices. the standard is not supposed to limit their creativity. It's just supposed to give them easy access to a lot of design considerations that you've agreed upon, that are mostly focused on the non-data part almost of the dashboard. And as such, they can more quickly make a good looking dashboard that's, again, feels consistent and similar to all your other dashboards. And then finally, by having a well-designed dashboard, it builds trust in for your users. They look at your dashboards, your dashboards look polished, and as such, your dashboard users will assume that the data has gotten that same kind of level of polish into it as well. Obviously, this is not something you should abuse by making beautiful dashboard that show the wrong kind of data. So where were we coming from? We implemented Tableau at VolkerWessels around 2017. At that time, we were doing this together with one of the local Tableau partners, and they gave us a basic design standard to work with. This design standard had a basic kind of title. We had a place for filters, and well, it worked pretty well for the first few years. But over time, we saw that we were adding more and more new functionalities, like new icons. We were trying to get lots of things that you'll find when I discuss our new template. But the problem was by adding on to the existing standard, kind of some of the new things, they felt a bit disjoined from what was already there. And yeah, it became a bit cluttered, and the older elements felt a bit outdated. So we decided, well, let's just do a full makeover to bring it all together. So I'm going to show you two things. First, I'm going to show you our new design and go through and tell you a little bit more of the details of why we chose certain design elements. And then afterwards, I'm going to tell you how we came to this new design in terms of process, in terms of checking with our developers or audiences, and how we managed to convince everyone to go forward and support them in that. But first, the more design and technical parts. To show the new design, I want to contrast it with a dashboard that you might know. This is the Superstore Dashboard that's been shipped with Tableau Desktop. This has a couple of good design considerations in terms of visual representation of data, but I think the overall dashboard design is not very spectacular. It's fairly bland, but it shows the defaults that Tableau kind of tends to give you. So when we change that to our new design, and again, we're using the same graph types, just slightly different colors and layouts, it looks like this. And to me, already this is a lot more modern feeling, and it feels a lot more polished. And I'm just going to go through individual considerations here in the next couple of slides to tell you what we did and why we think this works. So the first thing we did is to put tiles. Everything we put it on tiles. So all the data elements have a white background, and the overall dashboard has a gray background. This makes sure that the data really pops off the screen and really becomes front and center to your attention. It also creates these nice looking borders without there being borders. You just kind of group parts together on these tiles, and you don't have to have like specifically gray or black lines in between. We do this using the padding that Tableau allows you to do on containers or worksheets. And by just having a bit of outer padding, you create that sense of space between the graphs, and also having the separation that you need to organize it. One more point there is that we also, the light gray that we use as the background for our dashboard matches the exact color that the Tableau server interface has. So when we open our dashboard, they kind of bleed into the background, but because of all the data elements are on these tiles, they still make a kind of a strong showing of where the dashboard, where you should focus your attention. But the titles, they kind of bleed back into the overall user interface of Tableau server. So the title, not too much spectacular there. We made it large to pop out, and we made sure to align it with the brand identity. We also put the logo next to the title. It used to be on a very different place, and just kind of group that together using the blue, black text that's in the logo to show in the blue part the dashboard title, and the black part the tab or the worksheet of that dashboard. So the third thing we did also in the title bar is to add some logos. These were, in our old design, these were kind of the logos that were added over time, but we have one logo to show the timeliness of the data, what's the last refresh. If this is not as we expect it to be, this turns red with a different icon. There's an icon to make a pop-up come to zoom into the data. There's a link to our definition dashboard, and then an information button where you, if you hover over, you get a bit of explanation about the dashboard itself. We chose to put these on the same light gray background as most of the other elements, because they're not the main. They shouldn't be the first thing you go to when you look at the dashboard. You should be focusing on the data. These are just supporting mechanisms for the dashboard. Also, by having all these icons come from the same library of icons, it also makes them feel a lot more, it doesn't draw as much attention as when you would have a lot of mismatched icons here. So that helps as well. Then we also made a choice that is giving us a little bit more work, but we think it's worth it. We actually use customized tabs for our worksheets. Tableau already ships with default navigation tabs. These are all on the top left part of your dashboard. And since you cannot format them, they feel more as part of this Tableau server UI than part of your dashboard. And that's what we found with our users as well, that some of them, they didn't even realize there were tabs that they could click through. So we decided to now embed them in the dashboards. These are all navigation buttons. And obviously it means that if you add another sheet, you need to go back to all your other sheets and add all the buttons manually. So there's a bit more work, but we think that having the ability to format and really embed it into the dashboard is worth it. The filters, not too much there, but we, again, trying to reiterate, we put them on this light gray background, which makes them a little bit more pushed back. Again, we don't want people to go immediately to the filters. We want them to focus on the data, and then the filters are there just as a supporting element to the dashboard. And we put all the supporting elements on this gray dashboard, gray background. And then a little bit more of a technical thing we added was the zoom icon. I told you about it before, and you can see now that if you click on it, it actually opens kind of a pop-up, it looks like. It's actually a show hide button with a floating container that's all over the dashboard. When it's hidden, you don't notice anything. You can just interact with the dashboard, and when you click on it, it opens the container, and that container can pretty much contain anything, of course. We tend to use it to show some details. This is especially useful if people have made some selections in the dashboard, and then they can click to view some of the underlying details, underlying data at a level that we can then set for them. And finally, we decided to use this to go from previously we were using fixed sizes for our dashboards, and I know that these are performance-wise they are much better. And going to a flexible size of your dashboard can be difficult because it does make it more difficult to make sure everything stays aligned and in one place. But we found we had so many different screen sizes, especially with people working from home, people having different laptops, especially Microsoft Surface tablets and those kind of laptops that have a different ratio of height and width. Makes it very hard to make one size that fits everyone. So we decided to make a compromise and say we'll make the dashboard scalable in the width of the screen, but not in the height. So we use the same height and then a small range of widths to at least allow people with a bigger screen to use more pixels, and the people with a smaller screen to have a reasonable experience with their dashboard as well. So putting it all together, it comes back to this design. We've been using it for, since last year summer now, and it's been pretty effective. Again, I'll show you how we got to use it, but the responses have been good, and I really feel like we've taken it to the next level in putting it, just having a more robust but also modern looking design. But we didn't get there automatically. Of course, we had to manage some change to get here, and that meant involving some stakeholders and seeing. And I'll tell you a bit about lessons we learned there. So our stakeholders were primarily our Tableau developers, our data team leadership, and then our dashboard users. For our Tableau developers, obviously, we needed to convince them. Well, we wanted to work with them to create this template. We wanted to make sure they felt involved. So we had brainstorm sessions to figure out what the pain points were with the old design standard. Also some sessions to try and iterate on some new ideas, to figure out and mock up some new ideas of how to solve those. And then we kind of put them all together into a few proposals. At the same time, we needed to convince our data team leadership that it was worth spending quite a bit of time to rebuild all our dashboards into the new standard, because we didn't want to have a transition period where we had a lot of old and new dashboards at the same time. We really wanted to make sure we could pretty quickly move from one to the other and yeah, make sure that our dashboards actually kept that consistency that's so important. With them, we actually had some conversations. Of course, we had to show them why we thought a new design would be worthwhile. Like I told you before, we had to tell them the benefits of having good design, showing them how much work it would be. We figured it would probably be about like 2-3 hours per dashboard to convert. Well, that's with 70 dashboards, that is quite a bit of work for people to go through. And then finally, we also had to work with our dashboard users to show them, to involve them in the decisions. Where do we want to go? Check if the design worked for them, but also see if it actually seemed to add value for them, because you don't want to just change something because it looks better. You actually want to see if it helps people at all. There's a few things to keep in mind there, though, because we had some lessons from actually especially the interviewing of our stakeholders. When we tried to involve them initially, we just had groups of people where we showed them 2 or 3 new ideas that we had for the new design, and the responses we got weren't super useful. And I think it was mainly because we found that these people, they could see the differences between different options, but they didn't have a very strong preference most of the time. So what we learned there is that it would be more useful to have, maybe not in groups even, but just have one-on-one conversations and show them, well, our preferred new design against just the old design, and see how they, what they noticed, seeing them interact with the new design, see where they got stuck, or what was what they felt was very natural or logical. That was a lot more useful than trying to get people to look at multiple new designs and telling you which ones they like best, or which elements they like best across those. It tended to confuse people more than it helped us. One point of caution when you actually have people interact with your new designs is that they may still have some kind of learned behaviors of the old design, which are, well, easily changed, but will take a little bit of time. For example, we had a go back to the homepage button that was shaped like a small house in our old design, and in the new design, we decided just to use the tabs that we have on the top right to just have one tab that says "Go back home" or "Go back to the front page." But we found that people were so invested in looking for that small house icon that they completely didn't read the button at all, even though it should be pretty clear once you notice it. So that's maybe a place where you might want to accept that it will take a little bit of time for people to get used to the new situation. If you feel like on the long run it's actually worth, and you think it's a better solution in the long term. So with that, we kind of found a design that we liked, but then we figured, well, we still need to change a lot of dashboards, and also going forward, we want to make sure that people actually apply this design. So we created a couple of tools for our developers to make it simpler for them to start using this new design. And I'm just going to go through a couple of those. First, we have a dashboard template. This is our template that is a Tableau file people can download, and well, probably 90% of the times people will download this and then start working on the graphs that they need to put into the template. So the template has all the formatting set up already. All the headers are set up in the right way. The colors are set up. It has all the color codes already in the file itself. So it's easy to copy and paste if you need to. And it just shows you what the dashboard should look like. And then you can really focus on just adding the visualization, so the bar charts and the line charts into this, rather than having to work to put together like the titles and the tabs and the icons. They're all already there, so it's very simple to start working with, and you just need to change some of the settings to get it to work for you. But for existing dashboards, we actually gave them this as well. This is a blueprint that tells them exactly all the measurements, all the locations and settings that they need to do to convert an existing dashboard and resize the elements of an existing dashboard to this new standard. that was pretty useful as well, although we did see that some people actually prefer to just rebuild the whole dashboard almost from scratch using the template rather than having to adjust all the different icons and containers to the right sizes for the new template. But this is definitely a way you can help people because otherwise they have to go to the template, go into the settings, figure out what the number of pixels for a certain element is, then go to the dashboard and just keep tabbing back and forth. And this they could just print out and have on their desk while they're rebuilding their existing dashboards. And for that, we also made a step-by-step guide. If they were going to rebuild an existing dashboard, it made sense to have a certain order in the steps that you take. Otherwise, you keep going back and forth on certain things because maybe one thing you do influences another. So we told them, or at least put some guidelines in place for what the steps should be. It's all in Dutch, so you probably can't read any of it. But yeah, so it also did help, and I think that is a good way. You really want to put in some work to help your people. If you have lots of dashboard, lots of people that have to make this transition, it does help to invest a bit of time to really prepare and make sure they have the tools necessary to make this work and don't get too frustrated. So yeah, so we're super happy with our design. We've got a lot of good feedback since we changed last summer, and also working with the new template since then has been great. So yeah, I hope you can take away from this why it's important to have a good design standard to make sure your users trust your data and make that a little bit better, to allow your developers to focus on visualizing the data and don't have to worry about all the other supporting formatting and elements in your dashboard. And finally, also to just make your consumers feel at home when they open one of your dashboard. They know where everything is. They don't have to worry about that part. They can, again, just focus on the data because that's the most important part. And then I hope you have some, maybe I've given you some ideas of how you can apply these design elements in your own dashboards. Adding the tiles to your dashboard is a relatively simple way of just giving some space in your dashboard, and it really immediately starts to pop, at least when we did it. Blending your titles and filters into the background is kind of part of that as well. And then I hope to have given you some ideas about how you can apply that change management with your end users, with your team, and with your developers. And yeah, so we're super happy and proud of our design standard. And yeah, if you have any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them now. Just gonna have a quick look at the Q&A if there's anything there yet.
Yeah, don't think we've got any questions coming at the minute, but yeah, if there are any, please pop them in and we can get to those at the end, or if anybody's got any now, please pop them over in the Q&A.
Okay,
thank
perfect.
you so much, Jim. That was a fantastic presentation. Yeah, and as you say, it's some really great takeaways there for people to use, some valuable design tips. We too also, beginning of last year when I joined, we already had some standardized templates, but we went a little bit further like yourselves. We kind of, we reached out to our design team to help us to align our dashboards with our internal branding. We also provided like color palettes, suggestions to our analysts. You know, it really helps to keep, keep reports that are going up to server, they're in front of our stakeholders. It's great to keep them all, looking the same. And I think things that you've touched on there were, having things in sort of in different areas, like the grey background, the white, things like that. It really helps people to absorb information, and that's really key when you're building dashboards, isn't it? So and to compartmentalize the data. So yeah, and also recently we also I absolutely love your document with all the sizing and all the everything on there. We recently did something similar, but not to that level. So I think we're gonna have definitely take a look at that and look to do the same. So thank you so much.
Right.
Just double check the Q&A again. Nothing come in. So yeah, thank you so much, Jim. So up next we have Robbin. So Robbin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gemma, and thank you, Jim, for that great presentation. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And if you could give me a thumbs up or a shout out if you can see a white piece of paper where it says, let us become comfortable with the new data model.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat to you all today about Tableau's data model. A little bit about the background. I work as a data school coach at the Information Lab and the Data School in the UK. I started using Tableau in early 2018, and I was complete rookie to this piece of software. And then ended up doing a few years of consultancy on both Tableau as well as Alteryx, and all types of subject matters. But about back in the year 2020, when Tableau released its version 2020.2, they introduced this new data model to us. And I had no idea what it was about. And one of my colleagues came to me and said, okay, well, great that you don't know anything about it, so make a video on it. So my colleague Andy Crew was like, okay, force me. I'll make a YouTube video on it. So it makes me having to look into it. And what is this relationship thing? So after being voluntold to do that, I actually said, oh, this is quite exciting. All these new types of relationships and the joins that you don't have to do anymore, and blending. You really have to touch blending. It's like, oh, this is quite cool. So I ended up teaching and training people in our company at other companies and making some more content on that. So hopefully in the next 15 or so minutes, I can give you a little bit of an overview of what I came across over the last year or so using this data model, and give you a bit of tips and tricks and things that you might want to look out for. So I'll go over a little bit of a story. So when we were in Tableau 2020.2, and I tried to download a version of it, but it's no longer available, anything before 2020. I don't know which one, but I tried to get an old version to show you what it was like in the old version, where we only had unions, joins, and blends. In any of the versions that you will download now, you'll have relationships as the default, and then we can still do unions, blends, and joins. But by default, typically, a relationship will be set up. So a brief overview of what are these things called unions, blends, joins, and relationships. So if I give you an example of unioning data, we want to stack data on top of each other vertically. We want to stack them up together. So on the left-hand side, we've got two tables that have the same column names or have somewhat the same column names. So we can say, okay, put name on top of name and ID on top of D, and we create ourselves a new table that's now consistent together. It doesn't have to be one or two or three tables, can be as many as you like. Basically picking up files, let's say yearly data, 2010, 2011, all the way to 2020. We can then union these together nicely inside Tableau. Joining, instead of stacking things on top of each other, we want to make data wider and add additional information to every row of data on the table. So whilst we can still have a person, a name, and an ID, we have another table that contains sales for this particular person. So we join these together on this ID field, and then we get an additional column attached to a name, which is then a sales value, a measure that we can use inside Tableau. Now, when this relationship got introduced, we can actually, instead of joining these two tables together, we can set up a relationship. And instead of showing an arrow in here now, I've just drawn a line. Setting up a relationship is just something set at the data source level, but nothing will happen to these two tables unless I start building something. So both a join and a relationship could be valid ways to bring these types of data together. Now, if we take it maybe a step further, we want to not just look at things that match on a row level, so a name and a person's sales, but maybe we've got some sales at a daily level. And at a monthly level, the organization sets ourselves targets we're trying to meet. We can set up a relationship between not just the date and the target month, but we can actually extract the month from the date, set up a relation to the month of the target. So we can have different level of aggregations being related to each other, and Tableau really neatly bring all these things together. Now, this is the example of what a blend would do is exactly the same of what's shown here on the top. But before we had this data model available, the only way to relate this data together would be either to set up a blending between two separate data sources, so a month for month, or we would join these things together, get an explosion of the data, and then correct for it with level of detail calculation. So these are the 4 elements that we're going to be touching on in the data model. But what has changed? So I can't show you what has changed because I can't show you what's before and what is after. But basically what Tableau has done with this really neat graphical, which you can also get from the website, the link is shown below. It shows us that in this new data model, we're now talking about something called a logical layer and a physical layer. We can build out logical tables, and within the logical tables, we have this physical layer, and we can do set up our physical relation in here. So these are joins, unions. As whereas on the logical side, we've got relationships between those tables. Now, this is a 3D graph. Tableau can't even make 3D graphs. I'm quite impressed that they make this for us. But what does this mean to us? How does it sort of show to us what happened? So I've used those same unions and joins and tried to put them in the screen here to get a view. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit and move around. Let's focus on the top here. When we're doing unions, this happens at a data source level. So we go into a data source, and I'm going to show this to you in a second. We're going to union these together. This happens at the physical level. So a table is being created when I do that. If I stack my first table on top of the second table, I then get an outcome of a table, and Tableau does that for me, and it's there. The same is for a join at the data source level. I just bring these two together and get a resulting table from it. And I'm going to be working from this table. Now the relationship here on the bottom left is we'll do that at the data source level as well. But the only thing that we do is specify how these tables are related to each other. So say relationship on an ID. Nothing will happen unless I start building. Now blending is not done at the data source level, but it's done at the sheet level. So once we've created data sources, we can go to a sheet and say, okay, I'm going to blend one data source to the next, and this time I want to blend it on month, the next time I want to blend it on name. So it's completely flexible. But now you might be thinking, what is this relationship thing that I've been talking to, and how does this affect me? It shouldn't really affect you. The way that the data model was created is so that it becomes a replacement of things like joins that we typically have to do and have to think about it. So it is trying to be very intuitive for us, and whenever we do set up a relationship, the outcome of that relationship when we start building things should be what we're expecting. Now, this is what I found to be true in a lot of the cases, but some cases this wasn't true, and I really didn't understand. Most of it came down to myself not really understanding my data that I pulled in. So what does it do? When you set up a relationship, it only brings data together. You will join it when you ask it to. It will do an inner join, a left join, a right join, and a full outer, depending on what fields we're going to be dragging in. So only when you bring in fields into your sheet, then a join will happen. And it limits it only to the data that you need. So sometimes you want a right join to occur. Sometimes you want an inner join to occur. So how can we use this to our advantage? I'm going to bring up a fresh workbook, Tableau, and I'm going to connect to some data here. Top left. I've prepared those tables that I've just shown you in the presentation as CSV files for us to connect. So I'm going to select my name list first. I'll open this up. Currently I have only one table, and this one table contains only 4 records. It has 4 names in here, all the 4 IDs. Inside my data pane, you can see that name list 1 is now shown up. This is now a block. This is my logical table that currently exists. And if I hover over it, it does so. Double click this logical table to see the physical table or its content. So before this new version existed, basically, this is the typical layout that you would get, or a representation of it as a can't show the old one. So we would have a single table in here, which is called name list 1. I would then pick up my name list number 2, left click and drag and bring it close to that name list 1, and it says drop it here to form a union. This still works. Now to set up a union, I can see what has happened. I can edit this union and say, okay, I've stacked number 1 and 2 on top of each other. They have identical field names, so they'll be stacked. and has also created me a third column in here to show you which record came from which table. This is now a physical table that is being generated. It has been union on top of each other, and it is here ready for us to be used. And you might think like, oh, I've done a union before, but I've never gone into this block. And that's completely right. You don't have to get into this block to actually set up a union, because what Tableau has done for you, it's sneakily hidden it, or shown you that you can just drag it in and drop it on top. So if I am back in this original layout, just need more data, drag tables here. If I pick up that same name list and bring it close enough to that logical table, it will show up as a union. I drop it in here. I can see on the outside, I've now done a union. It's given us an icon. And what it's done in the background, it is just open up this sheet for us and then put it here inside the square. So the same thing that's happened before. So it has not really changed the functionality in the sense it's just a union. I've got my next piece of information. That's my sales data. My sales data, I've purposely only put in sales from 4 people within this list, and there's ID number 5 until 7. I want to know who these people were so I can put a name to the money they've spent with us. And I pick up my sales ID and drop it in here. And as soon as I start to bring it close to these tables, you can see this noodle starting to appear. And that's when we're talking about relationships between tables. It will automatically identify us. I can see a common field, ID and ID. And because I've got my sales logical table selected, I can get a preview of what's in here. So I've got a date, I've got a sales, and I've got the ID. That was in the previous block. If I click here, name on the left, it shows me the result of a union. I do not get to see the result of this relationship. It's just a noodle that sits here in the middle and the sales ID that sits there on the right. Now I will then pick up a target. I'll bring in the target close to my sales because I know I have a monthly sales target. I'll bring it in here, and it sees that there's no common field that exists between these two tables. So my sales is at a daily level. My target is at a monthly level. So what I need to do, if I click onto my target, I'll have a look. It's a month field. It currently brings it in as an ABC, so it's a string. I'm going to force this into a date, and it will return us the first of the month for that particular date. And when I go into my particular relationship or setting it up, I'll create a relationship calculation for that to bring these things together. So what I need to do, I need to truncate my date to the monthly level so that I return the first of the month for every single date. Now, I have misspelled that. There should be a T in there. And I've lost control of my mouse. Doing things on the fly. Oh, I didn't know you could pick up something like that. There we go. This will return a date time, or sorry, so a date time. So I'll return it as a date. So now I've got myself a date field at the monthly level, and I'll set up a relation to my month. I can see that it has now worked, but again, I can only see that I have a target for the first month of 2020, so January, and the second month, February. I said this is all neat and this is all great. But what has now happened if I go into my sheet? I can see that I've got these 3 logical tables being generated here on the left-hand side. And nothing is currently happening between these tables. So what will happen if I drag in an ID for my first table? I can see that I have number 1 to 8 showing up. So let me just format this workbook slightly larger. So entire view, see number 1 to 8. And I can bring in people's names so I can see what they are called. Now, if I drag in the sum of sales of my other table, it then immediately identifies I only have sales for Nora, Laura, Emma, and Andre. That's great. Stuff is happening in the background. If I take another approach and just have a look at the monthly level, so I want to look at my discrete month. I want to look at my sales. Change these into a bar chart, and then maybe I'll bring in the target. And let's color these measure names. You can see what our targets are like, swap them around, and I can compare my sales to my target. So even though my sales values, if I hover over that data and get some information, consist of 2 rows of data, so I can see my sales appearing here on the 2nd of January and the 6th of January of £10 and 5 pence, as well as £30. I know the target at that particular level is just 35, 1 row of data, which is just the 1st of the 1st of 2020. But because we've related it on a truncated value from the sales value, this just all brings it together. So there's no duplication happening here. So it's being smart and it knows how to first aggregate something and then brings it together. So that's all quite cool. And it works intuitively until we run into things that doesn't. So I'm going to go back to my presentation and talk a little bit through that. So it does stuff when you bring things into field. Okay, that's fine. So it makes life easier for us and sometimes look like magic because how did it know that all these things had to happen? But on the background, it doesn't really fix your data. And what does that mean? I'll leave that for a second. So when I set up this data originally, I only brought in sales from these 5 for these 4 people, but I have 8 people in my list. If I bring in the ID field on the left-hand side and bring in the ID field for my sales data, I would expect it to just return me the list of 1 to 8 and just 4 to 8, or sorry, 5 to 8, the other one. As soon as I drop this in, I get only 5 to 8 being returned. And I was like, oh, why didn't it bring everything back at the same time? What is Tableau doing? Only when I then bring in a field such as name, it will bring in the 4 names in here, but I had 8 originally. So what's happening here? What's happening in the background is that in relationship, by default, it will first aggregate the data to the levels you set the relationship on, and then join these things together. Now, because at the moment, I currently don't have any measures on my screen, it doesn't think about bringing in back onto the other name. If from my name list, I now bring in a measure, so a green field, just put it onto detail, it brings that back, that information. Because what then happens, okay, give me the count from the left-hand side, give me the ID from the right-hand side, aggregate first, bring it together, then finds there's no ID field within my sales, but it will return it because I've told to count the records over these particular 4 values. So initially I thought, oh, Tableau can't do full outer join. No, it will do full outer join, and in this case, a left join when I tell it to. If I'm only looking at sales, I don't need to see those other 4 values because it's just a list of names. I just want to look at the sales. So if I bring in sales for these people, I don't need to see those numbers sitting there on the right side. Oh, that's quite cool. So let's go back into my data source and bring in a 4th table. So I've got an email list, and this email list got the email from people from number 1 to 8. I want to bring these in and I want to connect them up, and I'm just going to drop them here next to my sales because I know that there's an ID in there. And I want to create myself a view where I have the name of people, and I will just look at their email addresses. Okay, hang on. I knew for sure that in this data, I've got these 8 people sitting here in my email list. If I look at the data itself, I can see, yes, I've got 8. But it's not bringing me back that full list. And that's because I actually made a mistake here, or Tableau does do what it's intending to do, but I put my email list in between my sales ID or my sales values and then the name list. In my sales ID, I only have the ID 5 to 8, but because I've put it there at the end, it's going to go from the left, okay, my name, and it's going to go through my sales ID and then look for the email list. So I've just attached it to the wrong side. So if I just pick it up here and attached it to the name list, go back to that same sheet, you can then see I've expanded the email list, and I've now got all of 8 of them in here. So things I didn't know beforehand when I came in here, it's like, oh, it's wrong, I'm doing something silly. And then instead of just having a quick look at my data and see what's going on, I went into these particular noodles. I clicked on them. It's like, you know what? I'm going to go into these options and I'm going to change them and then see what happens. And that's where I made the mistake as a start. Now, I'll quickly drop back to the presentation here, and it really just highlights if you want to change some of these settings that we have within the relationships, and then now clearly indicated that they're only performance options. Before that, where they were just advanced options in the original release, if I remember correctly. But changing these settings will not fix your data, but it can potentially speed things up. So before I finish this particular session, I want to go over what these performance options mean. So they talk about cardinality and they talk about referential integrity. And these are the performance options that we can see here in the screen. And I think Tableau has done a great job nowadays by actually bringing in a lot of information into those tooltips. What does cardinality do? What is this many to many? What is this referential integrity? And what is that some records or all records match? I'm going to try to explain it in my own words, and then you can always hover over them to see if Tableau's explanation is better, which I think it does, but I've always tried to translate things into my own. So when we're talking about one or many, when we talk about cardinality, cardinality is a term when we talk about things as low and high cardinality. When we say one, it means that for this particular case on the left-hand side, for every single ID, for every row, I only have one record, so high cardinality. So for 37, I only have one record. For 38, I only have one record. For 39, I only have one record. When we're talking about a table that has many, for that same ID field, I'm going to have multiple records. So I can see that for the same 1337, I've got multiple records in here. I've got 4 of them. So these would be a many table. They are not unique. There's more values in here that make this unique. There's a sales and there's a date value. So both ID and date maybe make up that unique field. Could be multiple sales on one particular day. Referential integrity talks about some records match versus all records match. Now, it really just talks about if you've got something in the left table and the right table, all records will match to each other. What does that mean? I've got full matches on both sides. And the example that I've shown you now is actually you've got a name, I've got 8 names, and I've got 5 for 4 of them, I only have sales. So I'm only going to have some records match from the left, but all records match from the right. So what happens when I change these things, even actually in both of them? So if I have a full outer join, if I want a full outer join to happen, I'm just going to say some records match because I'm not sure. And that's also the default from Tableau, because let's assume we're not sure that all these records are going to match. I will always return you a full outer join if you tell me to. So if I bring in 2 dimensions, 1 from each table, 2 measures, 1 from each table, it's going to return you a full outer join and show you where gaps are. Make sure that you also bring in a measure. Just dimensions will not return a full outer join. If I change something from the left-hand side, say some records matched on the left, which is the example that I've shown you before, 8 names, but only 4 sales, but all records matched on the right, it will only ever return a left join. The other way around for right join, as well as the inner join when all records match. But what does this do? It will only speed up things rather than first aggregating stuff, joining things together. If we change these few options, we either change what type of join will happen, or if it will aggregate first and then join. So cardinality decides that part. If we're going to say one to many, it's going to join first and then aggregate, which in terms of computing is quicker. If we leave it to many, it's just going to do aggregate first on both sides and then join them, which for these types of small data set that we're using are not going to make any difference. But it might speed things up if you work with larger tables. That is a very quick overview of what there is to set with relationship. Now, the last thing I would like you to show is there's different extract options as well. And by default, it will be one or the other, but you can actually say extract either the logical tables, so every single block that we had, or extract them as physical tables. For us users, it's not going to make any difference. It's only going to create this one Tableau data source or one hyperfile, depending on how you're storing it, but how it embeds it into the background. So if you've got some massive tables within one logical table that you don't always need to be joined, it might be better to store them as physical tables, because then it will be smaller as an extract. Whereas if you do logical tables, every single logical block that you have on your screen will be stored as a table separately in that file that you've done, and the relationship will only ever happen there on the screen. It's just the difference of sort of how the space is being utilized. Now, to wrap things up, we haven't really talked about things like when should I be using one over the other. And I've been using relationships all on the go, all on the fly. Anytime I can get the chance to use relationships, I typically use them, unless there's a necessity to use, let's say, blending over the other. So I've had a very short list here on the screen, and I'll show it to you because I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time. So I'll briefly touch on them, and then I'll leave any Q&As open so we can talk about that if we need to. So unions, when shown, there are inside this physical layer. You want to stack them on top of each other. Very typical use case. Only when you stack data on top of each other, that's when you want to do a union. In joins, when things relate one to one, so one row matches one row, you can either decide to say, okay, I'm going to set up a join and just create that table for me, or just leave it up to the relationship. Because if you're not always going to be using all the data in one go, why would you explode your table, make it really wide, when only a certain sheet you might want to have to combine, certain you might not. Blending still has a very much a place in the world when data does not join and relate one-to-one, and relationships need to be dynamic. Relationships are set at the data source level. So whilst I'm building stuff, I can't actually reach it, or I can't actually change it. Blends can be done on the fly for every single sheet. And it also allows you to do incremental extract refreshes per data source, whereas relations don't, at least not yet. Hopefully soon, fingers crossed, that will come part of it as well. So this sheet, I'm sure we can share those resources with you, Gabby, at the end. I'm going to wrap it up and leave it at this. So I'd like to thank you for your attention on this particular topic, which could maybe be not as flashy as using Tableau, but it's a little bit of stuff that's going on in the background. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was amazing. We'll just double check if there's any questions in the Q&A area. Is there, Maria?
Yeah, no questions. Only that one from Robbie, but Robin already answered.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Thank you so much. It really is quite game-changing stuff, isn't it? The new data model. We actually have leveraged it in confused.com, using it to build self-serve data sources for our main insurance products. And it's been a huge success. It's really helped our analysts to, with getting data out quicker, lots of quicker turnaround times and tickets, and they're not relying anymore on building lengthy code all the time, and we can use this to get data at our fingertips more faster. So brilliant, thank you so much. If we get any questions, then we can always just do those at the end, but it doesn't look like there's any today. So thank you so much, Robin. Right, so up next we have Liam. If you want to share your screen.
Yep, no problem. I think we've got to stop sharing the current screen, I think.
Apologies, Liam.
That's no problem. Here we go. So, let me just get the chat box up as well. It's a bit difficult. I'll also be, so my name's Liam, so I'll just introduce myself. So I work at confused.com for just over a year now, maybe just a bit longer than that even. And I've been using Tableau regularly for about a year at that time. I didn't use it too much when I started. I was used to doing numerical analysis in the past, but my visualizations were always quite basic. Like if you used to matplot. Oh, sorry, I haven't got my screen on either. There we go. So if you use like matplot, that's what I was mainly using. So Tableau for me has been a massive game changer. I was always jealous of seeing news articles and reports with amazing graphics and figures. So it's been a really good eye opener, especially being able to analyze data with the visualizations. So one of the big changes, as Gemma said, in our company recently was that we wanted to kind of leverage the relationship model within Tabular. So it was kind of down to about 3 or 4 of us to build it all up. And it was my job to kind of just do the analyst side of it, make sure it's like capable and usable for the analysts. And this is kind of what my talk is steered around. What I struggled to find was a tutorial where an analyst spoke through what was going through their mind and their thought processes as they were working with one of these sources. So what I've done is try to retrospectively go back and build myself that tutorial, like the one that I would have wanted to see. So what we're going to be covering is obviously relationship sources and the new characteristics. How do you set up a relationship source, so the cardinality and referential integrity. So I won't go into too deep on that because I think Robbin did a really good job. So I don't want to double up on it. And also contextual joint and smart aggregation. So I'm unlikely to actually use the words contextual joint and smart aggregation because I prefer you to understand these behaviors, and then on your own back, you can go off and label them up. I think it's a lot more important for you to understand the actual behavior of the source. But I will roughly tell you which one's which. It's mainly contextual joints, so it's a clue. So what are we going to be looking at? So what I've done is I created a bit of a scenario for us to dive into. And what this is based around is a Eurovision Song Contest party. So Eurovision wasn't in Cardiff in 2021, but this is where Graham Norton held his party. And he's hired a data analyst because he wants someone to jump into the data that's been collected about this party just to get a bit of insight. But he knows that he wants a relationship source. He knows the advantages of using it. He's very ad hoc, so he might throw in new data later on as well. So we need analysts who can understand contextual joints, smart aggregation, and also how to interpret and build in a calculate field on one of these sources as well. So the data that we've got from this party. So first what we've been given is Graham Norton's contact list. So this is just like his Rolodex really. So everyone at the party has an RSVP on this list, but not everyone on the RSVP list is on the contact book. And that's because there's some people at the party who Graham Norton didn't invite himself. So they might be +1s and things. Some of the other information that we've got is the seating plan. So Graham Norton put together a seating plan. So we got the first name, last name, and then simply a seat number and a table number. We then also got a table for table theme, which each table within the party has just been given a bit of booze, and that booze is based around a European country. So that's also one of the pieces of data we got. And then using this piece of data here that links the guests to a seating plan, allows us to connect us to some of the kitchen data as well. So we've also got a list of all the main and desserts that people ate as well, and that's based on the seat and table number. So as well as at the tables, each guest was given a scorecard just so they can give a 0 to 10 for each of the, or nil point to 10, I should say, for all the countries as they play along. And we've also got some information from a barman. So at the party, there's also additional bar where you can go up and make additional purchases. So the barman, having absolutely no regard for GDPR, has agreed to hand this information over as long as he can be flipped on Graham Norton's red chair. So result. So first thing I'm going to do is just quickly show you the data and the data source area. So it does look a bit different if you're using kind of an older version of Tableau before relationships were introduced. But here I've kind of pulled in the majority of the data already. But what I'm going to do is just pull in one of the pieces that are missing, so the contact book. I'm just going to connect that to the RSVP book. So what you see is when you drag data tables into your source now, what happens is you get this what people are calling a noodle between these two. So like Robbin described. And what it's going to do is just ask you to define the relationship between these two items. So first thing you need to do is whatever reference matches these two, we just need to describe it. So it's first name and last name, first name and last name. And just as to make this data simple, I've made sure that no one shares a first name, no one shares a last name, and therefore no one shares a first name and last name. So if you just want to add, if you've got more than one field you're adding on, you can just click it here and add it in. So last name on here as well. So I'm just going to go over this quick because we've already gone over it once today, but I'm just going to look at the performance options just to show you this. So as we said before, the cardinality and reference integrity is kind of set as this as default. So many to many, some to some. So what cardinality means is essentially saying, given this reference, how many times would you expect this unique reference to appear within that data set? And I'm just going to let you know now that on the RSVP list, each guest only appears once. So we can set the cardinality to 1 there. And it's the case with the contact book as well, that each guest is only, each person only appears in the contact book once as well. So we can put that cardinality as 1. As I said, not everyone in the RSVP list is from the contact book, and not everyone in the contact book could have been invited to the party. So some records match and some records match is the best thing to leave it to here. But if you knew that all records were going to match, or all records going to match, you just simply change it to that, and it allows you to increase the performance. But if you're not too sure about these properties between your relationships, then leave it as many, some and some. You can then figure out in your data if there is a one-to-many, or if all of them do match. You can come back and improve this. But if you're not too sure, do many-to-many, sum-to-sum. So all I've done here is just throw in that contact one here. So let's take a look to see what that looks like now within the worksheet. So what we've got here is, normally when you're working with a flat data source, you just have all your dimensions on the top half and all your measures on the bottom half divided by one of these kind of like small lines. But because our data source no longer has one single level of detail, and by that I mean if you didn't have relationships and we were creating joins here, it'd be one data table in a sense, and that's one level of detail. And that's why you'd only have one divide of dimensions and measures. But now that we've got a level of detail introduced by every single table, Tableau actually keeps an individual split for each one. So we've got this level of detail introduced by the additional purchases table, and it has its dimensions and it has its measures on the bottom. So something that you would have on a normal flat data set, so say a normal join one where you haven't used relationships, at the very bottom of the measures, you'd also have a count, a row count, which is just simply a column of ones that when you put out in the sums, tells you the number of records in that table. Because we've got multiple tables now and multiple levels of detail, you essentially just have one in each of these tables. So you can see here, this is a column of ones within the contact book table, and it just, if you pull it out, it's going to give you the number of records in that table. So it's quite similar, just it's been broken up by those level of details. So let's go into actually doing some querying. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is dimensions, and I'm going to talk about just dimensions from a single level of detail. So a dimension from a single table. So when you do this, it's quite trivial. What it does is it just pulls the full domain off that list. So say, for instance, Graham Norton wanted to know all the meals that were available to guests. You can just go over to the meal list and we say dish name, pull it out. And it's going to show the full domain of every single dish. So we can see all the different foods that people had available to us. Some of these desserts, some of these are mains. So quite trivial, but it's worth knowing. So the next quite trivial one is, which you saw earlier as well, is what if you use a dimension from two different sources, two different levels of detail. So let's start off with the dishes. So we know every single dish, but say for instance, Graham Norton wants to know, well, what dish did each customer, which dish did each guest have? So what we can do is, we know that if we use a dimension from two different tables, the way it constructs the viz is that it does an inner join between those two tables. This is a little quirk that can be used to answer some questions as well. So the fact that it inner joins between these means that you only see relevant fields against other relevant fields. So if we wanted to see what each guest had to eat, you can just go down to the RSVP list, pull out first name. And like I said, first name is as unique as last name, but I'm going to pull out both just to make it look a bit more realistic. And you can see, because of that inner join between these two tables, we've only got the relevant meals for each of the guests. It's not giving every meal to every guest. So that's just one way you can use that little quirk to get some results out of it as well. But it's worth knowing that that's what's going to happen. So what if you want to create a calculated field? So I think the most trivial calculated field that you can produce is just a simple constant. So I've got one here already. So a simple constant is something like this. It's just a unitary thing, say an integer. So on a normal flat data source, if you didn't build this on a relationship source, what would happen if you pulled this out is that it would match the level of detail of your source. So it would basically be like a column of ones. But because Tableau now has multiple levels of detail, it now needs to decide, well, actually, I need to assign this to a level of detail. And the way it does it is it looks at all the fields that are used to define whatever your term is, and it creates an inner join between them all based on your relationship that you've defined. But here, Tableau is going to look and say, well, there's no fields used from any of the tables. So I'm just going to let this be its own level of detail. And it acts very similar to this SQL query here. If you just did select one, that's how this aggregation is going to work. So if I pull this out, and it's going to be defaulted as a sum, you can see it's 0, it's 1. But because if it's a level of detail, that is simply just 1. So if we do an average of 1, it's always going to give you 1. We can do the minimum of a single unitary number. It's still going to be 1. And that's because of the fact that it's acting very similar to this. It doesn't have, its level of detail is unitary. So it's quite trivial again. Now we're getting into some of the more kind of interesting parts. So what if we were going to make a calculated, row level calculated field from a single table? So one question that might come up like this is, say Graham Norton wanted to just know the number of seats and the number of tables. Maybe he's forgotten, even though he's the one who planned the party. He might be quite a busy bloke. He's got a show every week and stuff. He's got to read all those books and guest albums. I'm pretty sure he does. So what I'm going to do is just quickly show you how we can build that up. So I'm going to create a calculated field and call it number of seats. And we know that this is going to need some data from one table. So it's going to need it from the seating list. So what Tableau is going to do is to choose the level of detail of this is it needs to include something from that table. So the way we do that is to be quite trivial. So we'll say if, and I'm going to go over to here, just pick up any field, seat number is equal to seat number. So that seems really trivial. Surely that's always true, and it is. Then 1, then end. So what Tableau is going to, sorry about this formatting. Hope you can remember what it looked like. But essentially this is saying if seat number equals seat number, then 1 end. So what Tableau is going to do to assign this level of detail is going to say, right, what are all the tables that I needed to describe the term I put up here? And the truth is the only table it needs is the seating plan. And that's straight away what this function is then going to be acting on. It's similar to if you did an SQL query and you had the from seat list, and this would be your select at the top then. So if we, and obviously there'll be an aggregation on this as well. So if I just show you how this will work. So again, this is just a constant, but because we've added in this trivial part, it's actually acting on that seat table. So if I pull this out now, you can see that that 1 has suddenly been added to that level of detail. So now when we're summing it, it's actually given us 20. So just to point out, what you'll notice is that has actually now come here, and oh, I've already got one left over to use that one. So what you can see is that it's sat itself within this table because Tableau can be sure that this level of detail is the same as this level of detail because it only uses fields from that. So just to kind of solidify that understanding, what I'm going to do is show you how you can get the number of tables. So just introduce a trivial equation using a field from that table. And now Tableau is going to change the level of detail that this measure is being applied to. So now this is actually going to give us the number of tables. And you'll see it change here as well. So number 4. So now that measure is now acting on a different level of detail. And what you see is it's jumped here now. So it's actually sitting here. So as an analyst, that is kind of the main part that you'll be thinking about when you're creating these row level calculations. So what if we were creating a row level calculate field that used fields from more than one table? So one question could here be, Graham Norton, you know, he knows he's put all the rowdy people on table 3, and he just wants to know how many additional purchases of drinks that they've made. So as an analyst who understands our data already, we know that that's going to have to cross over 2 tables. We're going to need to know, first of all, the table number. So I'm going to get that from the table theme. And we're also going to need to know the number of additional purchases. So that can come from that row count here. So I've already got this built up just for the point of time. So essentially, the first thing that's going through my head as an analyst is, right, Tableau is going to take the 2 tables that are going to be needed within this. So table theme and additional purchases, and it's going to inner join them. And it's going to inner join them based on the relationship that we defined at the beginning. And even if these 2 tables don't directly join, it's going to use the relationship to the tables in the middle to do that. So what that means is this field, we need to consider it acting on a table, acting on a LOD generated by these 2 here. So this might look quite trivial, this item v item, but what that's doing is it's bringing in that additional purchase. So we're saying if table number, so that's from the table theme, equals 3 and item equals item. So that's always going to be the case, then 1. So let's pull this out. And what you see is it should give us the number of purchases on the table, but I'm going to just demonstrate to you why that trivial part isn't actually trivial for what we're working on with relationship fields. So if I take this part out, so it's still a valid statement, but now when Tableau looks to generate the level of detail for this function, this inner join part is going to be gone. It's only going to be acting on the table theme. So it's saying if table number equals 3, then 1. This is essentially acting on this table here. And what you see is just going to equal 1 because there's only one table that equals 3. So that's just showing you how to set your mind and how Tableau is going to set those level of details. Now we have multiple levels of detail. So, and it's quite important to remember as well, which is going to come up in the next one, is that that is actually done with an inner join as well. So that's Tableau's choice. They could have picked to do an outer join, but they picked inner join for this. So this is just, obviously there's more than one way to skin a cat. So here I've just shown confirming that number 13, and simply I just pull up the table number and then the count. So you can see it's come up, table 13 is 13. So that's just showing that, you know, that answer is correct and we can be quite confident then. So this is just a little tip. So when you're doing these cross table row calculations, what if you wanted to count something on the higher grain? So if you're combined in two different levels and you might want to count something that's on the higher level, then when you do an SQL query, and if you're not familiar with that, but what you do is you count a unique ID on that higher level grain. So it's just a tip really, this is. So I'm just going to quickly show you. So if Graham Norton wanted to know the number of tables that scored the UK nil pois, Graham Norton's quite patriotic, so he might not invite these tables to the party again. So what you need to do is, here it's incorrect at the moment. So what you can see is, first of all, always your mind needs to be how many tables are being used in this calculate field. So you can see score and country are both coming from the score table, and table numbers coming from the table. So this is straight away what the level of detail is that this is acting on. So this is what my function is going to be acting on. So the problem with this is I'm counting table number when this is 0 and this is United Kingdom. But because this join is acting on score, it's actually going to give me the number of times that a table has given 0 to the UK, rather than it being the table number itself. So if I go down and pull this out, you can see it's actually given us 5, which is more than the number of tables that are at the party. If you remember, we had 4 tables. So we know something's gone a bit awry. So the reason is because we need to count a distinct. So it's not really a relationship tip. This is more kind of a general tip when you're doing inner joins between different levels of detail. But if you're doing general direct querying, you'll have to do. But it's worth keeping in mind here to get around the fact that Tableau's picked to do inner joins between these, and often they're going to be different levels of detail. So here we're counting the distinct table numbers, so we'll get the actual number of tables that are doing it. So 4. So it looks as if every table has had someone who's voted 0, but we know that there must be a table that had 2 people, because that's what's caused that additional count, and that's what I've shown here. So what I've done is I just pulled out table number, the country, and the score, filtered the United Kingdom, and pulled out the score count. So you can see that 2 people scored UK 0 on this table, so table 1's definitely not getting invited back next year. So what if you wanted to evaluate unmatched values in between tables? So the issue is because Tableau's picked to do an inner join between the tables on a cross table row calculation, it means that you can't evaluate missing values. So as you know, if you had a reference between 2 tables and you did an inner join and one doesn't match the other, you lose that data unless you do an outer join, a left or right join. So I'm just going to show you how that can cause a bit of an issue here, and I'm going to show you the one that is wrong. So I've actually put it wrong here so you can see that. So a knee-jerk reaction by an analyst might be to do something similar that we did earlier. We would say, right, we know we're going to need 2 tables for this. So, sorry, the query that Graham wants to know is he's seen some people at the party that he knows he hasn't invited personally. So they're not going to be in his contact book. So what we're looking for is all those additional guests who might have come through as +1s. So the way he does that is he's going to look up the first names and last names and see if there's a phone number available. So in the contact book, everyone has a phone number, and they're all unique phone numbers. And if you're in the contact book, you definitely have a phone number. So here's the reasoning is, well, if I could look at every first name and last name and it's got a null for its phone number, then it must be a guest who I've not invited directly. But we know that when Tableau joins the contact book and the RSVP book, is doing an inner join on our defined relationship between first name and last name. So those missing ones are going to disappear. So if you evaluate this, it's actually going to give you 0. So it would look as if Graham Norton, no one turned up that Graham Norton didn't invite, but he knows that's not the case. So what I'm going to show you is how you work around that. So I'm going to get the correct one up. And the way what you do is you use a level of detail expression. So here, what we need to do is take data from one table, put it on another one without joining them together. And the way to do that is a level of detail expression. So first thing I just want to go over is, first of all, the way Tableau assigns the level of detail to a level of detail expression is it only looks at the field within the partition. So here, it's going to be the same level of detail that's generated through these fields. So these fields are both from the same table. These are both from the RSVP list. So this is going to have the exact same green as RSVP list. And you can see the Tableau, because it's so confident that it's actually put it in that table as well. So what this is going to say is create a column on that RSVP list, to this level of detail. And for every first name and last name you can find, go to the phone number within the contact list and count the number that you can find. And because it's not doing an inner join, we're not going to lose the times where the first name and last name doesn't appear in that table. So what it does, like I said, it gives you that column, and I'm going to assign that column to give a 1 when it's 0, so it doesn't find a count, and 0 when it has 1. So it's only ever going to be 1. So let me just show you that working out. And you can see 7. So there's 7 people at this party who Graham Norton didn't invite directly, so they're +1s, or they're sneak-ins even. So, what's this saying? That's not too important. That was an example I was going to do, but it's fine. Next thing I'm going to go over. So everything we've looked at so far has been around contextual joins. And I purposely didn't want to keep throwing the word contextual joining because I think it's quite a confusing word. So it's better to just, I think, to call them at the right time joins. So you've defined all these relationships between your data, and simply Tableau just uses and joins what it needs when it needs it. So when you pull something into the viz. So the only thing we haven't gone over is smart aggregation, and that's what I'm going to go over next. So first thing I want to do is add in a new data source. So like I said, Graham Norton's quite up in the air, and he turns out he had another data source he didn't tell us about. But luckily, we're working off a relationship model. We haven't joined all our data together. So what we can do is actually just grab this and join it straight in. So Graham Norton gave every guest a gift bag at the beginning of the party, but not every guest has had the same number of gifts. So some guests, all the guests had a party hat. Some guests had a party hat and a horn, and then even fewer guests had a party hat, a horn, and a foam finger. But the rule is that the guests had to have these on their person the entire time in the party as well. So it was a bit of a joke for himself. So what I'm going to do is just define the connection to his first name and first name, and he's also done it on last name as well. So excuse the spelling here, I've done surname, but it means surname. And like I said, we already know the relationship between it because it's our data set. We know that RSVP list is only going to appear once. But like I said, some guests have more than one gift, so they could appear many times. And we know that every guest has got a party gift, so all records are going to match. And no one on the gift list isn't at the party, so those will all match as well. Brilliant. So now we've set the performance, we can go in and have a look at our query. And what you'll notice is gift just brings itself in straight away here. So the reason that's got a 1 at the end is because I pulled it in earlier on. So it's just got a kind of like a bank memory there, but you can ignore that for now. So say, for instance, Graham Norton's been told by the bar staff that they want to know how many purchases have been made, dependent on what they saw the guest wearing. So the way we do this is pull out the gift. So you can see the 3 gifts I said about foam finger, horn, and hat. And what I'm going to do is go up to additional purchases and just pull out how many additional purchases they made. Let's pop it like this. There we go. So we know that the relationship between gifts and additional purchases isn't direct. It goes through RSVP list. And we know that this is a one-to-many from RSVP list gifts. So it's like a many-to-one. And then we got a one-to-many. When you ever have something like this where they join onto the same, so each of these first name and last name, when this happens, you can't assign a given gift to any given purchase. And this, in a way, is what you'd expect as an analyst. So here we can see we've got the total number of purchases. But the truth is, we know that some of the guests, when they made the purchase, would have also had the hat and the horn on. So actually, the total number of purchases is 53. And what's happening is Tableau's taking and replicating the reference that's being counted here and puts it on every dimension. So there's been 20 purchases where they could see the guest had a foam finger. There's been 43 purchases where they knew the guest had a horn. And there's been 53 where they knew the guest had a party hat. But because some of these were crossed over where one guest might have had a party hat and a horn, they're being replicated across the 2. So the only other part then is resolve. So resolve means that if you were kind of wet behind the ears as an analyst, you might just grab your calculator out and add these numbers up to get the total purchase in, but we know that that's incorrect. So Tableau's quite smart at this. So if you were to use the total within Tableau, you can see that what it's done, it's resolved it. So it's resolved it back to its original level of detail, and it basically knows the level of detail of this measure. Like I said, it calculated based on either what table it's from or the tables that construct it. So it knows when it does the total that it needs to resolve it. So you can see it's not miscounted, it's not double counted. So another way you can see that is, for instance, if you were to split that, then the gift by the name, it's a bit more obvious to see. So if Amir went up, every purchase he made, he would have had all these items on. And you can see the fact that that additional count has been replicated across those. And you can then see it get resolved by popping in that subtotal there. And if we did a total, obviously it's going to come up with the total of these. But if it was possible, say, for instance, we lived in another world where these two people could be the same person. It's not the case, but say, for instance, they were someone who had two identities and we didn't know about it, but Tableau did, it would actually be able to resolve it at this stage as well. So that's quite a neat feature. So that basically covers everything that we need to go over. I believe I've got my table here to show everything. So what we've covered is, like I said, I've tried to not jump too much into the terminology. I kind of feel it's more important that you understand the behaviors and you can kind of work by yourself to get the labels and figure out what things are called. But it's all about managing the fact that now you have multiple levels of detail, and that's basically all the new functions that have been put into this. So I don't know if there's any questions that people have that I can answer.
Yeah, actually, I think we've got a question come in for you, Liam. So we'd be curious to know how you've gone about learning all of this, all of these techniques.
So like I said, there wasn't a lot of material out there. So I would recommend it if you type in Tableau relationships blog. There's someone from the official Tableau team who's made a three-part blog on it. But like I said, it's very formal. I think their hands are tied in terms of formality. They can't afford to give like rough understandings. So I really wanted to fill that gap. Like I said, the thing that I wanted myself. So unfortunately, I have not been able to find someone who's talking through their thought process on this. Unfortunately.
Cool, thank you so much. I think we only had one other question. That was just a general question from Gabby, and that was around will all of the resources be available? And yes, absolutely. Anything that the speakers can share with you guys who are attending, we'll send out any resources and any links and everything after the session. So thank you so much, Liam. That was amazing.
No problem. I mean, the only other thing I was going to suggest, obviously, that Robbin went over is that I think the biggest use of these relationships is the fact that you can alter and change this original page without it affecting these initial pages. So when I added in gifts here, because we haven't gone and done a real join, the cardinality hasn't changed on any of these, and it means that any work you previously done, I didn't have to go back and adjust, counting different IDs and stuff. So yeah, that's the one thing I would really labor on. I think there's some improvements Tableau can make though. So for instance, when you're inside the calculated field, especially if the source is published, it can be quite difficult to understand what the original relationships were between the tables. So I think there's some improvements for analysts to just help them with that thought processing that I've gone through, but hopefully in recent updates that will be put in.
Yeah, fantastic. I don't think, just looking at the Q&A, I think let's have a quick look. Yeah, we just got lots of thank yous. Thank you so much for your presentation. So yeah, thank you to everybody for joining. Thank you to all our speakers. Our next meeting, just have a look out for any updates on our tab page over on Tableau's website under the user groups. And as I said earlier, this is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards over on Tableau's YouTube channel. And additionally, I did mention it earlier as well, but yeah, if there's anybody who's from South Wales who would be really interested to join us, help running this tug, then please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much again, and see you next time.